Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Mayor Greg Fischer podcast. Today we're going to discuss the transformative role that bourbon has played in our community over the last decade or so. It's been an intentional hospitality strategy to build it around something that's unique, obviously, to Kentucky and Louisville as the epicenter, as Bourbon City. It may be hard to believe, but it wasn't long ago that we didn't have these distillery bourbon experiences here in the great city of Louisville. And today we're home to 10 distillery experiences representing over $260 million of investment in the urban bourbon experience, a citywide trail filled with award-winning micro distilleries, exhibits, and craft cocktail destinations, and it's just growing all the time with popularity. And we recently just had an entire festival around music, food, and bourbon. People came from all over the world, Bourbon and Beyond, a tremendous success by Danny Wimmer Presents. And another bourbon-centered Epicurean event, Bourbon and Barbecue, is going to be happening in November, the first time ever for that festival. So an entire economy has sprung up and is supported by bourbon and Bourbonism here in Louisville, bringing new investments and jobs and attracting an astounding 19 million visitors to Louisville pre-pandemic, and we're rapidly approaching that number now. And so this wasn't an accident. Over the last 12 years, we've worked intentionally with many businesses and other institutions and partners to make this happen. So today, we're going to talk about the work that's happened and what's ahead. With us are Fred Minnick. Fred is the world's foremost authority on bourbon, and Karen Williams, a longtime leader in Louisville's tourism sector, and is responsible really for growing the Bourbonism hospitality concept into a word that's now accepted all over the hospitality and tourism industry. So really honored to have both of you here today.
Thanks for having me. It's weird to be on this side.
Right, right.
I'm usually interviewing him.
That's right.
So.
Well,
Truly a pleasure.
Let's see how this goes.
Right.
So let's start with you, Fred. You've got an interesting story about your journey to become a spirits writer and an expert. And so tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Yeah, so I moved to Louisville after a tour in Iraq to be with the woman who is now my wife and mother of my two children. She's awesome. And I was a writer, and I got this job as a food writer, food editor, and I didn't really know a whole lot about covering the food industry. But when you write about food, you eventually write about alcohol, and I started writing about alcohol around 2005, 2006. But at the same time, I was, like a lot of soldiers coming home, I was really struggling. And I had a lot of issues that I knew if I didn't deal with, I'd either end up dead, homeless, and most certainly jobless. So I left my position at a company called Net World Alliance on the east side of Louisville, I think in Anchorage actually, and I started focusing on myself, and I basically checked into the Louisville VA. And it saved my life. It saved my life in a lot of ways, and it also taught me how to enjoy life again. When you go through therapy, any kind of therapy you go through, often you go through like just talking, and there's cognitive, processing, there's exposure therapy. And then I was introduced to a technique called taste mindfulness, and that was where I basically would focus on what I was tasting. It started with like a barbecue potato chip. I put a barbecue potato chip on my tongue, and I would think about it, like how the sugars like separated from the salts and the areas of the tongue it was populating. Now at this point, I had kind of gotten my foot in the door in the bourbon industry, as well as I was covering wine. And so I was training with like a lot of master sommeliers and a lot of master distillers. And this light bulb went off. This taste mindfulness technique could be used and applied in bourbon. And so this happened, and this light bulb went off around 2009 or 10.
And you were in the VA when?
2006 is when. So it took me 3 years to kind of get past that point of like, you know what? I'm not going to jump off the bridge today. I'm going to live, and here we are. I'm going to expand my life, and that was one of the big moments for me. And that was a time when there was not really anyone covering bourbon. There was some blogs and all the whiskey media out there would include Scotch, and there was only one person really in the world who focused on bourbon solely in the journalistic side. And so I decided to really hone in on covering bourbon. So I started covering bourbon like a journalist. And that was like, I would cover lawsuits, I would cover, I would reveal people's recipes, like, because this was a time there was no transparency.
So this is around 2010?
Yeah, 2010. There was no transparency in bourbon. People would not tell you the recipes. And so I would start reporting on that, and that kind of grew my presence in the industry, and the people in the industry loved it. The marketers in New York and in London didn't care for that too much, but people in Kentucky loved it. And that's where how I kind of grew my name. But the big moment for me, that first big moment for me, was when I wrote a book called Whiskey Women, and that was basically telling the stories of all these women who had made an impact in bourbon and Irish whiskey and Scotch and never got any credit. And so that book came out in 2013, and I wrote several books since then. But also around that time, I interviewed you for all the things that you were starting to do in bourbon, and that was kind of approach I took, was that I was looking at bourbon as like as something to cover like a sports team. And when you have books, you have to promote the books, and so I would do all these events, and I'd eventually find myself on stages, interviewing distillers. And around that time, when I was doing those kinds of things, Danny Wimmer was in the crowd scouting me to help with what would become, Bourbon and Beyond. But that's, now I've been on Top Chef, a show called Moonshiners. I'm developing my own TV show now. I've got several podcasts. Everything I do, I try to sprinkle. I try to bring bourbon with me as I'm like interviewing musicians and stuff now. So I'm kind of like, I'm so thankful for so many things in this world that I'm lucky to live. But it really does all go back for me to, getting in the VA and making sure I got some help.
Let's just go down that road a minute. I mean, what would you say? I mean, there'll be veterans listening to this right now that, we lose 21 veterans a day in active military to suicide.
Yeah.
What would you say to a veteran that's listening to this right now on what your journey was about and what you learned by when you finally said, I got to go to the VA?
Well, when you're in the military, you're taught to be tough and, fight through a lot of things. And that's very important for especially when you're in combat. You need to have that. But when you get home and you're out of that presence, it's like the world didn't stop because we were doing something. And it was just so hard to grasp that. And if you don't focus on getting yourself to live in this new life, I mean, I'm not the same. No one's ever the same after being in combat. But everything that like bothers you, the irritability, the anger, that all stems from what we went through. That we showed up and we stepped up for our country, and we deserve to live again, to have a life. And a lot of times, we find ourselves abusing substances, doing things to keep us from, numbing the pain or ignoring or avoiding the issues that are causing us there. And I'll tell you, it's hard. It is hard to sit down and relive those moments in therapy. But it's every day I walk downtown Louisville, every time I'm here, I look up on the rooftops and I look for snipers. It's an instinct that I have. It has never gone away. The difference between now and 2006 is that I don't crowd in like fear of that. I just look up, keep walking. And like, if you can, there's so many things that can keep you from having a life in the veteran community. And if you can just work on that and get in there, you will find happiness in ways that you could not possibly imagine. And my path was unique. And my wife is the actual director of mental health for the VA here now. She was not when we were dating. She was in nursing school back then. But, she tells people all the time that, we don't tell people in therapy to get into the bourbon industry. Yeah. But the thing about the bourbon community, we don't talk about like, hey, let's go get drunk. That's not what it's about. It's about appreciating a spirit, and it's not about abusing it. And there's also a lot of veterans in the bourbon community, and we support one another, so.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your service as well. And it's been extraordinary to see your development as an entrepreneur, as a former entrepreneur. It's been really fun to see. And of course, it's helped an area that we focused on, which is Bourbonism. And
yep.
Your description, Karen, his description of the 2010 kind of closed nature of the bourbon industry reflected our experience when I started in office in 2011. When I was running for mayor, I was like, how come we're not supporting bourbon and Bourbonism? Because as a business guy, I say, what's your value proposition? In other words, what do you have that nobody else has that you can provide such a great experience that people are going to enjoy and pay for it? And so it was really obviously, to me, it was bourbon. The joke is 95% of it comes from Kentucky. The other 5% is counterfeit. So why don't we embrace this as a hospitality concept? Because we did not have a hospitality concept as a city year-round. We've got the Derby, these other things. So we pulled all the folks together, and Karen, you were there at all those tables with the Kentucky Distillery Association, the Louisville Tourism, and the Convention and Visitors Bureau at that time. There was a lot of tribalism. There was no, I own bourbon. No, I own bourbon. Well, let's get in a fight over who owns bourbon. And I'm the new mayor, business guy going, this is stupid.
Right.
Why don't we all embrace bourbon?
Right. We remember those
Lots
days.
of win-wins, and it's going to do nothing but grow and help everybody. So what are your memories of those early days of how we tried to form Bourbonism here?
It is funny, Mayor, when you say that, because I remember it like it was yesterday, and you do too, Fred, as well, because we were at those tables together. And when you say just a decade ago, in so many ways, I think of what we have achieved in a decade. But I also think, the city and community has really gotten together very well. Because you're right. I mean, tourism for this community, as you say, 19 million visitors a year is huge. This community lives off of tourism, and every city in the world needs a hook. When they're out, they need a hook to say, what is it that makes us stand out? And even though prior to that, and when you came into office, it was one of the things you first said, we were out promoting bourbon, saying we would take a master distiller with us and we would talk about bourbon. And we would liken ourselves to say, Napa Valley has wine, we have bourbon, but not really taking it to the extent of where we are today, or even where we were 5 years ago. We didn't have, as you said, the 10 bourbon experiences, but we did have that hook. But we had the dream of where we wanted to be, but we couldn't get it together because of all the nuances you pointed out. But bourbon was something that we had, and we had the bourbon distilleries. And that was our hook at that time. So we grew that, and we were bourbon country, as you said. And that in itself had its little arguments along the way. And we worked with Lexington, and then we worked with Bardstown and many of the others. But then, we had our fights along the way. And honestly, I remember I extended the olive branch to KDA and said, let's work together on this. And as simple as that sounds now, it may have not been as simple then, but it worked. And, when you called me and asked me to do this, I was looking back at some paperwork, and I think the proudest moment is when in 2021, I got the Lois Matus Bourbon Award.
Yeah.
And it just, because I thought, oh my goodness, to get to that point, and that's KDA nominated me for that. So think about that, to nominate, for them to say, Karen and Louisville did that. It was the proudest moment. But this community, and really, Mayor, You got us to the table. You know, I can't tell you how many crowds I stood in front of when we brought a convention to say 95% of the bourbon, or I'd be out in the crowd and I'd say counterfeit. But we had it together. But where we've been in a decade, I mean, it is now more than, it's not bourbon country. We are Bourbon City. We have the urban bourbon trail. It's not about, and nothing against Nashville. I was just in Nashville. When you say, you know, we never wanted to be in Nashville. You never want to be another city of what they have. Bourbon is classic. It's a classic nectar. But it's more than just a bourbon. It's about, like you said, Bourbonism. And Webster should say, Greg Fischer, Bourbonism. You are the doctor of Bourbonism.
True.
That's true. I mean, it's about the food. It's about the experience. It's about Danny Wimmer. And there's going to be so many other things that follow because of what you did, you know, bringing us together.
Well, and to Fred's point, we wanted to make it a 5-star experience all along. It's not about coming and getting trash drinking bourbon.
Exactly.
But we needed some of these experiences. So the early days weren't that, once we said, look, we're doing this for a good reason, everybody got on board real quick.
Everybody, very quickly.
I want to give a shout out to the Evan Williams experience because they were our first experience in town. Harry Shapiro was kind of his brainchild.
Yep.
Unfortunately, he's passed.
Yeah.
And I can remember the excitement around the grand opening. And in the excitement, you know, I talked about how Louisville is the bourbon capital of the world. Well, like my phone started blowing up on what's going on here. Bill Shekels, Mayor Bill Shekels of Bardstown. I said, how dare you call Louisville the bourbon capital of the world? Bardstown's the bourbon capital of the world. I said, well, we'll call ourselves the bourbon epicenter of the world. I said, well, that's fine. That's fine. So from that, I said, well, let's do a little Hatfield-McCoy thing between Bardstown and Louisville, and that obviously was just a small step. But this good-natured rivalry we have within the bourbon industry, how the bourbon industry helps each other as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And what's really neat, Fred, if you talk about this a little bit, is to see new people getting in the game, entrepreneurs, whether it's micro distilleries, whether it's tourism experiences. We're seeing a whole industry now kind of maybe in the second stage, because I think we're still very early with where bourbonism's going.
Yeah, if you look at any like spirits trajectory of historical data, they're 30-year stretches, and the beginning of what we would say is bourbonism really begins between 2008 2012. So somewhere around then is when we started seeing regular Jim Beam white label having double-digit sales growth, and so that's But the difference between that historical data and today is that's always just been based on consumption. And today we have the tourism side. And historically, the bourbon industry has always worked together. Like if a pipe went out, they would lend a pipe, or if someone's fermenters went down, they would lend their fermenters to help them. The greatest example is when Heaven Hill burned down in 1996. Brown-Forman stepped up and started making their whiskey. That's how the industry has always been. And now that you see so much new blood coming into the game, and they're experiencing that. The people, going into the liquor store, the people putting that stuff on the shelf, they're competitors. But the people who make it and blend it, that's kind of like family, with the exception of a couple distilleries that don't want to have anything to do with anybody. But probably one of the really good examples I have of this here lately is Ian Somerhalder. This big-time actor in one of the top 10 movies or TV shows of all time, and in Vampire Diaries, he started a brand called Brothers Bond with his co-actor Paul Wesley, and he's embracing this. He's getting taught by people in the industry, and it's I'm pretty sure he's very close to just completely leaving his acting career in the rearview mirror and just focusing on bourbon. That's how much fun he's having with it. But one of the things he keeps bringing up is how everybody in the industry is supportive and helping him. And he's like, you don't see that in Coke and this restaurant industry. He's like, it's only in bourbon. And the thing about the tourism side is that what has always held this from ever being a thing has usually been politicians who want to, who just look at bourbon as an intoxicant, or in the case of zoning, it's often like an explosive as well. Like, the Chicago fire was ameliorated because of distilleries being nearby, and so that has always kept people from really looking at it. And the insurance folks have always been like, you know what, maybe we don't have tours at a working distillery because someone will fall in the mash or something like that. But the consumers were like, we want to go. And they have been knocking on the doors of these distilleries for a long time. And they create the Kentucky Bourbon Trail in the late 1990s. And, the Japanese would fly out here to tour it. It was the Japanese. The Japanese were the big bourbon drinkers in the 80s and 90s. And they were a big reason why we even have a bourbon trail. Is because they would just show up at these distilleries and wanted to visit them. And so we talk about where are we with this? I mean, I think we have another 20, we can't really use historical data because we have the tourism angle now that we didn't before. What we have is an actual culture. Mm-hmm. We have a culture of bourbon that now, it transcends wherever you are. And it's actually bringing people together. I mean, one of the greatest examples is what Congressman Yarmouth did with the Bourbon Caucus. That's the only time those people get along is at the Bourbon Caucus. Right. So, bourbon is so unique and special to our country. And if we didn't have Louisville, the real heartbeat,
Well, we decided in our administration to go all in because it was unique to us. And it's an area where we could scale. You've got to have a hospitality concept as a city to grow.
You know what's interesting is there were actual distillers who were mayors. Farnsley was a distiller, and he was mayor of Louisville in '80. So to me, it's fascinating that you are the mayor that has this decision, this light bulb moment to embrace it. When there have been people very tight, close in the bourbon industry hold this position and not do anything with it.
Well, another reason was I saw it as a way to bring the rural area into urban with food and great Kentucky farmers. And, when you go to a restaurant here, people want to see where the food comes from. And you put that together with bourbon and the distillery experiences and then going out into the countryside, it's a magical time. I just had some friends here for 5 days and from Austin, and they're like, this is something special that is nowhere else in the world like this. So that's why I think we're very early on. So Karen, tell us, what would be a typical Bourbonism experience? If I'm coming here for 3 or 4 days to experience this, what should I be doing?
Well, Mayor, I think that when we decided Louisville, and I think of Kentucky, one of the things that we did is that, and this, Mayor, when we went to Frankfurt, we had to quit saying Louisville because sometimes you've got to put Louisville aside when you go to Frankfurt. And when I think working with KDA, we were trying to help KDA legislatively get ahead. So Louisville and Lexington and Bardstown, all of it, we were up there talking to the legislators and everyone saying, help us get these laws passed because it helps all of us. And that was the first time.
And what kind of laws?
Well, to help sell bourbon, to help sell bourbon in our communities as that we're now able to do.
Tasting on site.
Or to sell
Shipping bourbon.
Right, to ship bourbon.
Vintage laws.
They'd never seen that. They'd never seen the tourism officials, first of all, coming together and asking that. It was just, but I called, Eric and said, what is it that we can do to help you? And so then that also goes from an advertising standpoint. And so you say, what can we do? So it would be like your friends coming from Austin. And I remember working with Garden and Gun, Stacey Yates and I. Now when we bring someone in, it's not just, we want them to come to Louisville and spend the night in Louisville. And we have some of the best restaurants, the culinary chefs here in Louisville. But we want them to come to Louisville and visit our 10 bourbon experiences here in Louisville. But we also want them to go to Bardstown, and we also want them to go to Lexington, and that's what we've done. And I think that that's why this the spirit, KDA has seen it, and the legislators have seen it, and it's not just us saying it. Now they've seen this, the spirit, pun intended, really, really work. And so we've really taken our advertising dollar so much further. But now it's truly an experience. It's coming here in Louisville, landing in Louisville, coming in the airport. I mean, the airport, you look what the transformation the airport's done. I mean, Dan's done a fabulous job by making the Bourbonism start right there, what he's done at the airport. But you come here, you met Julep Tours, what they've done. They're in several of the big, the Omni Hotel. All the restaurants have taken on the flavor of Bourbonism. But we want them not, selfishly, yes, the hotels would say we want them to stay every night, but we really want them to have that bourbon experience and to go on to another part of our state and to enjoy another part of that culture and go on to Lexington or Bardstown or all the beautiful places that we have in this state. That, in my opinion, will keep bourbon alive for the many decades to come.
So it took a lot of things coming together to make this happen.
Yes.
I'd like for you to talk a little bit about our hotels and how, when Omni made the decision to come here, we were looking for somebody to go on that site. And the reason why the city chose Omni was because they were going to create a hotel uniquely around bourbon, a little bit around horses, that was going to kind of express our hospitality scene. And then the other hotels all contributed as well. But talk about how the hotels come into this play.
Well, and we have you to thank. I think about hospitality over the last and the hotel package. It's a package, and we were flat. Our growth of hotels and our convention center package was flat. We increased our hotel package 50%. And Omni really helped us do that, and you working with Omni. But Omni needed that hook as well, and they saw what we were doing with Bourbonism, with you leading. And we talk about what you did to engage Bourbonism, Mayor, but really it's really tourism. Not every mayor, and I think you always thought I said that to, and now I'm not the president of tourism, but I think you thought I said that just to blow smoke up. But truly, you understood the value of tourism, not just Bourbonism, but the value of tourism. And not every mayor understands that, the value of that trickle-down effect of that dollar. But Omni got it, and Omni really embraced it. You go through that hotel, what they did with their bourbon bar, what they've done in their rooms, but I think that's why Omni made that decision. And then you've seen how the other hotels, the Marriott, they have a speakeasy that you're invited to that only very few people get the opportunity to go that speakeasy. Every hotel has embraced that Bourbonism. Every hotel has embraced the food and the recipes that go with Bourbonism, or the type of rubs that go with bourbon, or the candles that go. You can go on and on and on. But our hotel package literally went from 3,200 rooms to 6,700 rooms in less than 3 years. And then we expanded our convention center. So again, I think of a decade of people that were in my shoes running a convention bureau. Sometimes it takes a decade just to look at a master plan. And that was the last thing I did when I walked out, when you said, let's okay, we're here, but what's the next 20 years? And now you have Cleo Battle running the convention center, and because of what we wanted to leave is now there is a food and bourbon group that will always be there talking about the future. Again, not letting it get stagnant, but always looking at the future of bourbon.
And I just want to throw in, it just gets dangerous when we start talking about particular hotels, because we leave others out. So, Gald House, over $100 million that they put in there.
Exactly.
Beautiful thing.
A bourbon
Hotel
bar.
Distill.
Yes.
It goes on and on. So kudos to all of our hotels. I just want to put that in as part of the package.
Absolutely.
And then we want one other thing here as we close out, Fred, here, and that's music. We've got the spirit itself, obviously, hotel, lodging, tours, art, music, food. It takes all this to come together. So we wanted to have a bourbon and food festival here in Louisville because there's wine and food everywhere. And when we put out the request, the ideas that came back weren't big enough. And then Danny Wimmer Presents had just finished up year 2 of Louder Than Life, and of course we've been good partners with them. He said, Mary, we want to do something big for Bourbon. I'm like, well, you guys are proven performers. What do you have in mind? He said, let us come back with something. So that's what, of course, resulted in Bourbon and Beyond. We just closed that out. 40,000 people there on Saturday night, 4-day festival, but 40,000 on Saturday to see Pearl Jam, other great bands there. And during that event, we had something fun going on the side, because a couple years ago when I'm sitting around with somebody, they order a Manhattan. I said, well, why don't we have a drink called the Louisville? And I gave you a call and said, Fred, what do you think? And you're like, well, why haven't we thought about this before? So we had lunch and kicked it around and said, well, you know, Karen Williams would be wonderful to run it. We're the idea guys on this. But so talk just a little bit about this, and then how we came up with the Louisville cocktail, and what do you think about that, and where's that going to take us?
So I'm amazed that it's over, because we were working on it pretty intensely there for a bit. But the Louisville Cocktail Committee was a volunteer group, consisted of myself, Karen, your staff, specifically Emily, and DWP, you know, most specifically Doris Sims, who is a saint. I love Doris, and we were trying to, we wanted to have fan voting, and we wanted to have professional judges voting. And like I've judged a lot of competitions. I own my own spirits competition, the American Spirits Council of Tasters, and I've been on competitions for a couple decades now. And I've never seen one with fan judging and professional judging. And then we had this, we had an award. The winner got $15,000. I mean, this is big leagues in the bartending community. And we were trying to figure out, like, how could we make this work and appealing, and have the distillers engaged. And so we came up with this idea of, like, the distillers pay an entry fee and nominate a bartender to make their cocktail, the Louisville cocktail. It had to have bourbon in it.
Kentucky bourbon in it.
And it had to tell the story of Louisville in their own respective way. Of course, you know, the story would be important for now. Down the road, it won't be as important, because the story will be it won the Louisville cocktail contest. And so we had close to 24 entrants, and in the first round, we would kind of weeded through and make sure they had the right recipes. And then the next round, we had myself as the professional judge, Francesco LaFrancone, who's in the Bartender Hall of Fame, and Bridget Albert, who was Obama's mixologist for his inauguration, and she manages all the education for Southern Glaciers. So we had some really high-level cocktail judges for that. And then we had the fan voting. And what was interesting is the fan voting was based on the bartenders' story and how they were making the recipes. It was very interesting to see how the fans voted. They seemed to have gone with the people who really focused on the ingredients and the story, and they didn't pull any punches. The one that had the most votes on the fan side didn't do as well with the professional judges, so it didn't go to the next level. And so the professional judges, we scored on a 100-point score, and then we converted the fan voting into a 100-point score, and we combined those and the averages, and we had 5 finalists, and we had some pretty stringent rules coming up, and I actually thought we were going to have to deduct some points.
Yeah, that was tense for a while.
But one of them was, like, since we had already voted on it, there can't be a substitute of ingredients, and 2 people didn't have the original ingredients. And I was like, well, we got to deduct points. And then out of nowhere, like, we got him. You know, someone came with the ingredients. I was like, oh, I'm fine with that.
It was, I think, vermouth for one, and
vermouth and bitters for the other. And it was like
out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere.
Yeah, that was exhale.
So yeah, but them's the rules, you know. And the people who would have been judged before could have been like, hey man, they changed your cocktail up. Anyway, so we watched them judge live, or we watched them make the cocktails live. We judged on presentation, originality, taste, story, and can it be duplicated? So those were the 5 things we judged on. The judges were, celebrity chef Chris Santos, Bourbon Hall of Famer and founder of Bourbon Women Peggy Noe Stevens, Samara Rivers, the founder of Black Bourbon Society, and by the way, she has probably the best barrel pick of Maker's Mark ever. She's awesome, and you and me, we were the judges.
Celebrities.
And we did the taste off, and we all pretty much had the winner in our top 2. So it was
And the winner, S.C. Baker.
S.C. Baker, yeah.
Knob Creek is what she used in her cocktail.
Yeah, she used Knob Creek, but the thing that I think that really separated her, originality. To me, originality was the metrics. Of originality are like, if it's a spin-off of an old fashioned, then it's a spin-off of an old fashioned. It's you're still giving a ode to the old fashioned. Hers was truly original. It used Chinar, which is an artichoke liqueur. And Chinar and bourbon are really go well together, but not a lot of people use it. It's mostly used as an aperitif. It's in a few gin cocktails, but a lot of people don't use it. So she used a very widely available ingredient in that, but it's not used that much.
And great presentation.
Great presentation. It was beautiful, but most importantly, it tasted great.
Tasted good, and also had really good ice cubes.
Ice was important.
You got, take away from this. Look, if you're drinking good bourbon, you got to have good, clear ice cubes, right? Otherwise, it can destroy the whole thing. So
that was like a 15-minute lecture.
Chris Blanford, one of our biggest sponsors, Kroger's, he asked you that question, Mayor, and you really killed it on ice. So.
You were, I have a friend.
Ice is important.
It is important.
Especially drinking a bourbon on the rock.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, we've come a long way with the ice. Maybe we can do another podcast on that. But as you all can see, we could talk a long time about bourbon in Louisville here. And I really appreciate you all, Karen and Fred, for being fellow travelers on this journey. It's been fun. We've helped a lot of people. It's going to continue to grow as well. So thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Absolutely,
Thank you.
Okay, so for those of you all tuning in, encourage you to visit one of our great local restaurants, have a nice bourbon drink, stay in one of our great hotels, go on a great tour, be kind to people, and spread the word about Bourbonism. I'm Greg Fischer. Thanks for joining my podcast.